my name is Dejanay Adams, and today we will be talking about something called the conduction system of the heart. The function of the cardiac conduction system is to make sure all cells contract in a specific sequence. Cardiac cells are autorhythmic, but what does that even mean? Well, I'm going to tell you. They can excite themselves without stimulation to the brain. They also contract at a regular rhythm. A fast rhythm? No. A slow rhythm? No. A regular rhythm, which is normal, right? Cells from different parts of the heart's conduction system have different natural rhythms. They all don't have the same beats per minute, which would be weird, right? Starting with the sinoatrial node, which is also known as SA, and it has 100 beats per minute. That's a lot of beats. The atrioventricular node, AV, has 40 to 50 beats per minute, and the ventricles, they only have 20 to 40 beats per minute. So, since we discussed the sinoatrial node's beats per minute, let's talk about the function, because everything has a function. Sinoatrial nodes are known as the heart's natural pacemaker. Did you know that? I didn't. I didn't even know hearts had a natural pacemaker. Then again, I guess I never really thought about it. Makes sense. It triggers contraction because it depolarizes at a faster rate than other systems. Now, let's talk about the atrioventricular node. This one receives action potentials from the SA node and transmits them through the bundle of His, not His, still the same, HIS, but completely different. Left and right bundle branches and the Purkinje fibers. That just sounds like a little bougie, Purkinje, which causes depolarization of ventricle muscle. The signal moves quickly from the SA node through the atria, experience a slight delay when it reaches the AV node, as it must pass into the fibers with smaller diameters. The signal then quickly resumes along its path through the AV bundle branches, apex and base of the ventricles, and then that's when contraction begins. So far we talked about the conduction system's functions and its natural rhythms. Now it's time for a mini quiz. I know we already started. You're probably asking, we didn't learn much. We didn't, but what we learned is really beneficial and it can help you. So, only 2 questions. That's why it's called a mini quiz. Number 1, what type of rhythm does cardiac cells contract? Is it A, fast rhythm, B, slow rhythm, or C, regular rhythm? I'll let you think about it, because you should know this. I emphasized on it. And the answer is C, regular rhythm. Number 2, which node has 100 beats per minute? We only talked about 2 nodes now. Is it A, sinoatrial node, B, atrioventricular node? Sinoatrial node. So, since we're done with that, I think it's time to talk about action potential. Action potential are a temporary shift from negative to positive in the neuron's membrane. It is caused by ions flowing in and out of the ion. During resting state, gated sodium and potassium are closed. Gated channels only open an action potential has been triggered. So it opens when the action potential has been triggered. No trigger, no open. You can't come in. Gated M is the activation gate. It's normally closed and opens when the cell turns positive. Gate H is the deactivation gate. It's normally open and swings shut when the cell gets to positive. So you can think about it this way. Gate H is the opposite of gate M. So deactivation, of course, the opposite of activation. Make sense? Gate N is normally closed but slowly opens when the cell is depolarized, which means it's very positive. I'll do a little sketch. I'm not an artist, as all teachers would say. So, let's talk about the cardiac cycle. I'm gonna ask questions and give an answer, which makes sense. What contractions compose a cardiac cycle? Do you know it? You sure? Do you remember systolic and diastolic? So the contraction is systolic and relaxation is, or I should say systole and relaxation is diastole of both atrials and both ventricles. Okay, so let's name each of the phases of the cardiac cycle, since that is what we're talking about. You have the passive ventricular feeling, the atrial contraction, isovolmic ventricular contraction, that's a long word, ventricular ejection, and isovolumetric ventricular relaxation. That's a lot, but don't worry because I'm going to explain it once we get to the next page. Describe the condition of the atrial ventricles and valves prior to atrial contraction. They all fill with blood. They are all filled with blood, which is a good thing. Okay. Atrial contraction increases pressure within the atria. How does this ultimately lead to ventricular contraction? So you have the atrial contraction. So it causes ventricular blood volume to meet its maximum. Describe what occurs during isovolumetric ventricular contraction. So the pressure increases in each ventricle, forcing the atrioventricular valves to close. Because too much pressure, they don't want to deal with it. They're going to close. Someone's being petty towards you, you don't want to deal with it. Close. Canceled, as we say nowadays. Describe the events of ventricular ejection. Okay. As ventricular contraction continues, the pressure inside the ventricles exceeds the back pressure in the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, which forces the semilunar valves to open. Blood from the ventricles are pushed into the vessels. Pushed. Pulled? No. Pushed. Remember that. Describe events of isovolumetric ventricular relaxation. Okay. This occurs when the ventricles begin to relax. Relax. When the pressure in ventricles become less than in great vessels. The back pressure pushes, like we said, pushes the semilunar valves close. So there's no change in blood volume due to this. Describe events of passive ventricular filling. The blood from each atrium flows through the open atrioventricular valve into the respective ventricle. So now we're getting to the heart sounds, which you may hear as lubbed up or lubbed up, same thing. It just depends on what you want to call it. So they are designed as S1 and S2. What do you think S1 is? S1 is systole. The heart contracts to pump the blood. And S2 is diastole. The heart relaxes. You have to contract before you relax. So, we have talked about basically everything that you should know. I will show you my picture of the hearts. Just give me 1 second. So you can get a better understanding of what's going on. noticed, before I forget, we talked about the ECG, which is also known as the EKG. It just depends on where you're at. And this is what it looks like on the ECG. It may be, hold on, it's gonna be, can I flip this? Yeah, I'm not tech savvy, I use Snapchat. Anyways, you have P, which is going like that, going up, and Q goes down, and R goes up, S goes down, and T is kind of straight. So we can go more into detail with these notes I have, because they're the same notes, just more to it. P wave, as we said, is atrial depolarization, which is the sodium channels are opening. AP comes before the heart beats. QRS, like we talked about, if you remember, is ventricular depolarization. T, ventricular repolarization. So that means the potassium exits cardiac cells and charge is returning back to negative, because remember, it was positive. Atrial repolarization is so big that you can't see it through an EKG. But remember, it's there, it's just you can't see it. So as we talked about the cardiac cycle, I will add about the pressure gradients, which is the high pressure on one side and low pressure on the other side. The gradients is a difference between high concentration ions and low ions. So that's where you get the low pressure and the high pressure is from the ions, okay? So the heart is creating pressure by contraction, which causes pressure gradients. And the heart works as a unit. So with low pressure, blood flows into the heart, which is a passive flow. Low pressure is when the blood says, okay, it's low, I can flow into the heart. When feeling the atria, the ventriculars are relaxed. It has to relax because they don't want chaos going on in, like, anybody. Like you don't want chaos going on in your life. You want to be relaxed. So when you do stuff, you want the environment to be relaxed, not chaotic at all. The blood wants to go back, hits the cuspids, and forces the valves close. Now, the only exit is the artery, flows into the gradient, it's gone. So in class, I learned how to draw a heart. So she told us about the Mickey Mouse ears, and then just do a little swoop. So I'm just going to talk about what's on here. You have the atrium sulcus, you have the superior vena cava, pulmonary vein, you have the left atrium on this side, right atrium on this side, aorta is on the left atrial side. You got the ventricular sulcus that's in the middle, and the pulmonary trunk that's above the ventricular sulcus. And the pulmonary trunk leaves the top of the RV and splits into two. Tricuspid is the right AV valve, and bicuspid is the left. So you think of a heart, it's going to be completely opposite. So the right, what's side you think the right is? This side or this side? This is my right, this is my left. But it's going to be on the left side. And the bicuspid, which is the left AV valve, which is also known as mitral, is going to be on the right. So we have talked about that. My apologies for picking up. I'm not a YouTuber. So what else before the time runs out? One more thing, just to throw it in here, not that she required it, you required it. It's the cardiac output, which is the measure of heart rate times the stroke volume. So remember that. The stroke volume is how much blood moves per concentration. You have the stroke volume equals the end diastolic volume and the end systolic volume. How much goes in minus how much is left. Thank you for joining my class. Goodbye.